And we're live.
We
Oh,
are live.
fantastic. Yeah, this is awesome. This is the first episode of what I think I'm calling the Zero Content Show. And I think kicking it off with you, Frank, is a really great way to do that. Um,
Thanks for
so,
having me. Yeah.
yeah, today's topic, I wanted to talk to you about something that I've heard you talk a lot about, which is, you know, mental well-being in the workplace and just in general. And I think a lot of that's also reflected by, I mean, you've been with Headspace now as the lead designer for 6 years.
6 years. Yeah, it was I think a few weeks ago, 6 years.
That's awesome. And on top of that, I know you do some workshops, which is where we met, and I'll talk to that. And you also have the Sunshine Shop, and we'll
Yeah.
talk a little bit about your Sunshine
Sure.
manifesto, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, let's do it.
Um, yeah, so a quick disclaimer, we're going to talk about mental health and share some experiences. We are not by any means professionals, mental health professionals, and if you are going through um, something that many of us have felt, definitely reach out to people who are more qualified than Frank and I. But with that said, I do want to start by sharing something, my personal experience with mental health and a really low point in my life. Um, and I think that's a really good segue into this. And so, I spent 4 years in the Marine Corps at kind of the height of the war, 2 combat tours, and that was enough for me to realize that having been married with 4 children, I didn't want that life for them anymore. I didn't want to be away. And so at the end of my contract, I left the Marine Corps and went headfirst into tech. And there was no moment of break, because there's always kind of this identity thing with veterans when you leave the military and like you shed that identity. And I didn't really take time for that. I went right into tech and I didn't know anything. I was learning as I was going, and the WordPress era was really booming. And so that's what I leaned into. And for 4 years I was just head down, and I'm certainly not bragging about this, and I'm also not exaggerating when I say for about 4 years I was working 90 to 100 hour weeks. And the reason that that had to happen was because I was taking on work with like freelance customers, and often promising that I could deliver things that I had never done before. And so what that looked like was closing the sale, then going and trying to cram the study to get it done, and then actually delivering the work. And I had left the Marine Corps to spend all that time with family, but I ended up not even doing that. And so while I'm doing the freelancing, I'm trying to make money, I'm trying to develop my skills. I'm also, very entrepreneurial, trying to build like little side projects, and kept building something and it would fail, all the while trying to keep the ship afloat. Fast forward to 2015, build something that doesn't fail, myself and a couple of co-founders. That takes us to San Francisco. We get acquired. It's the first time I've ever been to San Francisco, and suddenly feels like I'm under the big lights. Haven't had a chance to really rest or relax. And I quickly learned about that acquisition. While it changed my life in a number of ways, it cost me my marriage. I was divorced by that time. And I quickly learned that if you have a lot of passion for something you're creating, once you sell that, I don't think there's any language that will ever give you the same kind of creative control that you had. And it took me about a year of that before I realized I couldn't continue down that path. And in 2016, I found myself with my first big boy pants product designer job, working for a fantastic company called Quantcast for a mature product organization, which I had never been a part of. And I had the first moment ever to just rest.
Yeah.
The problem was everything that I had not addressed came crashing down on me. My identity coming out of the military, the identity that I no longer had as a co-founder of this thing that what felt like I had tried multiple attempts of creating something, and I finally created something that worked, and then I felt like I sold it in a deal that started to make less and less sense in my mind. And in 2016, I very seriously wanted to end my life. And I remember sending an email to my designer at the time at Quantcast, my head of product, fantastic people, and letting them know I'm not okay. And it was coming out in my work, it was coming out in my collaborations. And when I tell you that I've seen some great leadership in the Marine Corps, but those two people, the way that they stepped up to really help me, I have not seen leadership like that to date. It's the most profound um, acts of compassion that I've ever seen. They allowed me to get help that I needed, and for about 8 weeks, I admitted myself to a program, a DBT program, dialectical behavioral therapy, at the nearby university. It was kind of like a hybrid outpatient, 8 to 3 p.m. Monday through Friday, pretty intense. And that's the first time I've ever received any type of help, mental health help. And I was very privileged to be able to do that in the United States. One of the things is it seems like it's a big privilege to be able to get help, especially something that intense. And it really taught me a lot of great lessons about sitting with your emotions, accepting that two truths can exist at the same time, both equal value. And I really want to stress to people that good leadership and making room for people, your employees or your peers, to have this kind of help. I mean, it helped my family. It helped so many ways that I don't even think they are aware of how big of a help that was. But then, fast forward now, I'm on design teams of one, scaling these teams. I take your workshop, Frank. I think I took your workshop in 2021,
Yep.
and I was a lead product designer for a company, going through problems, trying to influence stakeholders, trying to have the confidence to build this stuff out. And so that was the workshop. What's the name of the workshop again? I can't remember.
It's how to it's how to influence and lead. It's basically a workshop for people, mostly designers, who are in a maybe mid-level to senior role and want to make that leap into a lead role or a principal role. So it's basically teaching you the kind of the ins and outs and the expectations of like how do you really lead as a designer, and kind of build up your, hopefully build up your um, make you not feel so impostery, and
Yeah.
make you feel motivated to take that next step, and feel a bit less alone in that process. Because my experience going into lead roles is sometimes in a company, unless you're like in a really gigantic company, there's only really room for like a couple leads or a few leads. And so you often get this competitive thing where you have a lot of people kind of on that mid and senior level, and there's like uh, only enough room for for one cowboy in town or whatever. And so it is a bit like it can be a lonely process to go through. And I think that group coming together, it's usually about 30 or 40 people from different companies. We're not in competition with each other, so we can really have these great conversations about what it's like to go through the process. And yeah, but also thank you for the story. That's an incredible story. I can't imagine what that is like, going from something so structured like the military, and then going into kind of the corporate workplace. Just the way I always think about this, kind of uh, the reporting and the kind of the trust and the honor that you put in a role in that situation, and then going into a corporate workplace, which is like can tend to be like a bit political and kind of career climby, and you meet some characters for sure. And I can't
Yeah.
imagine the contrast of both those worlds. Um, but yeah, thanks for sharing that. I'm sure there's a lot of people who can relate to that story in a lot of different ways.
Well, and I have a lot to say about the veteran side of it too. But
Yeah,
the one thing, there was a parallel between when I went to that DBT program and I realized I wasn't alone. And that was one of the first profound things that really helped me start to make better of a bad situation for myself. And when I went to your workshop, I was feeling insecure. I wasn't, there wasn't
yeah,
that tragic, but it was certainly just tough. And one of the first questions you asked was, and you kind of had everybody in the annotate mode on Zoom, and you said, "Before we begin, how's everyone feeling?" And everyone kind of typed out different emotions that
yeah,
essentially were insecure, uncertain, And what I recognize in that group, I'm looking around this Zoom, and these are senior and lead designers at big companies, recognizable, reputable companies. And I immediately realized, like, we are not
Yeah.
alone.
Yeah.
And all that insecurity, all these challenges we're facing, it was really great to see. And I think it's something everyone in this field needs a reminder of, is that you're not alone in that feeling with all the challenges that you're trying to figure out right now.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. And you see people in the workshops who are, lead designers at Google's and Meta and all these companies that we kind of put on a pedestal, and like the places that we've all gotten rejection letters from, and just to see that people who on the other side, who are, they're still kind of going through it in that way. Yeah, it really changes your perspective. I'm glad you enjoyed it and got to learn from it.
So Headspace for 6 years,
Yeah.
and I think there's a lot of like mental well-being built into your side project, the Sunshine Shop.
Mhm.
Was there a moment for you that really made mental well-being more important than it was previously?
Yeah, I mean, you talked about running your freelance agency and kind of working with clients, and when you're in that mode, and I was for many years, I did that kind of job for about 7 years, and you are you're kind of in like it comes in waves. You're either like starving or you feel like you're rich. Like it is like you go like 2 weeks without a contract, and then you land a big one, and it
Yeah.
just sort of like it repeats itself like that, and uh, it's hard to say no to things because you just think like it's going to run out, it's going to stop. So you're in that kind of like mode, and I think it's totally natural, and it is one of the reasons I decided to get into the world of product, because that way of working was just way too stressful. But it was all that I knew, and so um, going through that, and I was working with my wife at the time, who's also a designer and also a founder of Sunshine Shop with me,
Mhm.
um, and she was, it kind of like affected her first. Um, this kind of like every day, like pitching to new clients, the pressure to deliver the work, sending estimates out at night, like you're eating poorly, and then that leads to like you know, a little stress relief with some drinks at the end of the night, and then all of a sudden you realize I'm having drinks every night. I'm
Yeah.
waking up hungover. I'm not eating very well. I am like not taking care of myself at all. I got maybe some cool clients and some money coming in, but I'm not sure the trade off is worth it. Or either I'm doing things really wrong, or like it's hard to kind of figure out. And then it started to affect me, and it started to say, wow, I think I'm dealing with some health issues, and I had an autoimmune disease that kind of kicked my ass for a little while, and had to address that. I was having like crazy heart palpitations, like I was sweating a
Mm.
lot, like just really. I thought it was just that I was like motivated and driven, and it just always kind of felt like me. And went to the doctors, and he was like, "Hey, I think like you have this autoimmune disease, and we need to get you on some medication because you're literally gonna like burn out. You're like a motor that is revving like nonstop. Like at one point, it's gonna stop." And so did that, and I think that all kind of like all these things like collided, like having this career moment. I'm going way too hard, grinding it out. I'm interested in the world of product designs. I'm having an identity crisis because I was really like
Mhm.
a graphic designer, and my relationship is, if I'm working, like you said, those 80, 90, 100 hour weeks, your friendships, your relationships they're non-existent basically. You know, I got a partner at home, but basically your roommate when you're working that hard. And eventually just had to do something about it. And I didn't think, for many people, things like antidepressants, antipsychotics, I think are like a great solution, anti-anxiety medication. I wanted to try something else, and I don't think that meditation is a replacement for any of these things. But I think for me at that time, it was helpful to kind of zoom out, try to get a new perspective, see things a little bit differently, and really assess where I was at in my life in kind of all the different facets of, career, relationships. Am I really happy with where I'm at right now? Where do I want to be in 5, 10 years? So I had to, literally give myself some mental space to get some clarity on that. And yeah, then my wife introduced me to the Headspace app, and she was like, I think this could help. I'm going to give it a try. Would you kind of try it with me? And first I thought it's like ridiculous. Like I'm not, I would like kind of make fun of it, like you're this little app that makes you feel good about yourself.
Right.
Uh, and yeah, then I did the kind of the basics sessions, like kind of pushed my way through it. And then I was, I was into it, and I thought this is really interesting, really cool. I've never had this kind of interaction with something on my phone before. I didn't even really know this existed, and always kind of had it in my head that I'd love to work there. I'd love to work at a place like that because it just seemed like what they were doing was so unique and interesting. And they were the first kind of meditation app in the App Store, and the only one for many years. And yeah, I was pretty psyched to like jump into this career change thing, like think about leaving my hometown, like make all these big decisions. And I think taking that step back and just like calming yourself down, focusing on your breath, I think that really helped in getting me to where I wanted to go. Otherwise, I was just in this kind of cycle of grinding, and lots of privilege for sure to be able to actually do that. And it's not cheap to move to another country. I was born in Canada,
Yeah.
so moving to the US and getting all the immigration visa stuff sorted out, like that's a huge process. um, so yeah, that led me into the big jump from communication design, graphic design, into the world of product. And yeah, here I am.
I've got to imagine, because it kind of happened with me. Like I was learning through the method of like try something, get stuck, do independent research, and then go get unstuck and like continue. And then when I actually got to sit on like what seemed like the first like real product team, I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I don't think I have any idea what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to like soak that in. Did you experience some of that going from like communication visual design to like now you're a product designer?
Yeah, I mean, you don't know what you don't know, and you can only read so many Medium articles and kind of try to
Yeah.
make sense. I remember getting really stuck on the term use case. I kept hearing it in interviews. What is the use case? And I was just basically like a graphic designer trying to make mobile UIs, and I thought like this was enough. And yeah, after awkwardly getting through some interviews and no offers, I was like, okay, it's time to take this seriously and like really learn the kind of the human side of why people would use these applications or services. And it's that one. There's the Design Details podcast. I must have listened to an episode every day for like a year. I think I listened to the first few hundred episodes, and then finally I started to get the language. It was almost like filling in the gaps, and I felt like by hearing people talk about the work they were doing in the industry, I could now speak the language, because I didn't go to school for that kind of design. I basically just transitioned. But yeah, getting from like a small rural city in Canada to Los Angeles to like working with product managers who are coming from like Princeton's and Harvard's, like that just was a world I've never been a part of. That was so intimidating to get into. And just
Yeah, I felt
yeah,
the same thing.
yeah, the business jargon and the what the hell does net new mean? Like just things like that. Like it's just it's it was a trip. Yeah.
Um, and by the way, for anyone watching us live, we're going to do a Q&A in the last 10 to 15 minutes. Feel free to throw your questions in now, and we're starting to compile a list of those. So I heard you say that like you were listening to Design Details, like actively consuming things to try to
Everything.
get your
Yeah.
your interpretation of how to talk in the
Yeah.
room up.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear from you, like, what are some of the things that you did then or do now? And I also wanted to kind of emphasize something. I, for a while, was thinking like, eventually this imposter syndrome is going to go away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you learn, you know, you can be in this industry for a decade plus and still realize, no, like you're going to have it. If you continue growing, you're going to continue to feel this. And that was, again, something I noticed in the workshop. Everyone at these senior and lead levels still feeling it, right? Still trying to figure out, like, the problem spaces get more dialed in or complex, or I don't know that they're more complex, but they definitely get more specific. And you're like, how do I, you know, make this XYZ happen? So what do you do? I mean, when you're up against, like, I'm not sure that I'm the right person for this, how do you push through that?
Well, I think realizing that it's a very normal human feeling. Like I think most people sense that when they're in that moment where you could potentially grow and learn something new. Like learning and growing is it makes you feel like when there's something you don't know, it makes you feel kind of bad. And I try to just tap into like curiosity, you know, like just ask questions, acknowledge that you're not totally sure, that there's a lot for you to learn here, and don't pretend like you know everything from the get-go, and like just asking people questions and having conversations. They're usually pretty responsive to that. You can get a little bit cheesy with things like affirmations, you know, like just looking at yourself in the mirror and telling yourself like, I won't let self-doubt control me. You know, I believe in my capabilities. I deserve to be where I am. I am a hard worker. You know, things like that can be helpful. Not for everybody, but I found that to be helpful. Um, Maybe I'm alone in this, but I try really hard to keep my LinkedIn as up to date and accurate as possible. And sometimes I just go and read it. You know, I just try to think like, what does the whole like picture of my kind of professional life look like? And I'm really proud of everything that I've done. And just kind of seeing how, oh yeah, in like 2007, I was doing this, you know, and in 2005, I was doing concert promoting, and like, you know, just to see how much I've grown. And, you know, also probably a huge reason why I've been in this job for 6 years is that my managers have put their faith in me that I could grow into the roles, and that I could grow with the company and what, you know, what our members needed. Um, so that kind of like consistency, it's a lot of things, but having all of those inputs definitely helps. I also keep a folder on my desktop of like nice things people say.
I
Just
learned
like,
that from
yeah,
you.
for me,
I did. I think you talked about, and I don't know what you called it. I call it a quarterly wins journal.
yeah, yeah,
Screenshotting the feedback you get from customers, from peers, managers,
yeah,
screenshotting work that you are really proud of, even if it didn't ship, but you're like, I made this thing and I think it's really
100%.
cool.
Yep. And it makes those quarterly reviews a lot easier because you can go and look at like the work you've done. And you know, like I'll right now I'll take a screenshot of your and my conversation, and that's going to go in there, and I'll look at it
Yeah,
again.
I like, hey, you know what? I'm gonna do the same thing.
Cool.
I love that. And by the way, like having this working journal too, is like great for when you need to build that
Yeah,
case study in the future.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, and yeah, it's you get emails, you get messages on Instagram or Twitter, or somebody says something nice, or they shout you out, or whatever it is, whatever gets you motivated. It's nice to have that kind of a folder or your notes app or whatever, and have something to reflect on once in a while.
Something that helped me, and I hate to use like metaphors or analogies that I pulled from like the military, because I know that's not everyone can relate to that, but they always had these really like rudimentary ditties, and they're meant to be memorable. But I think this one stood out to me, and it was like, proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance. Right? There's like there's
It's
plenty of
awesome.
redundancies in that
Yeah,
that make that not great, but the point is, and I realized this, if I had to go into a stakeholder, like a feedback session, if I had to propose an idea, I remember the very first design sprint that I was helping a PM facilitate, I was terrified. You can
yeah,
read sprint all day long, but until you actually have to sit there and synthesize ideas in real time and put them on a
yeah,
board, you know, you're going to be like, whoa, what do I do? And one of the best things that you can do, and it's not the perfect answer, but for me, is just like spending the evening prior or 30 minutes prior to the meeting, like really getting your details together, thinking about
Yeah.
like, what don't I know that might come up as a question in this meeting? Like, what were some of my top 3 justifications for why I chose this decision? And just
Yeah.
spending a little bit of time prior to the big event going over that preparation, I always feel so much more prepared. And what's cool is even if those questions don't come up in that meeting, I notice that because I gave the thought to those things at some point down the road, whether it be in my career or just days later, like
It's in here.
that
Yeah.
becomes helpful anyway, you know?
Yeah, totally. And it's something I do a lot, and I'm appreciative of like the work from home Zoom situation for this, is that if I'm in a kind of high stakes call where I know I'm going to have to present something and speak to it, like nobody likes to see read off the slide. But if you can kind of rehearse enough to have it be casual and conversational, I think that's the key. But what I will do is I'll split my screen with kind of like notes on the right hand side and then the call on the left hand side, and just having that like almost script or bullet point list of things I want to cover uh, during sort of my part of the presentation or whatever it might be, that like takes a huge load off your shoulders. Just like you have that as a fallback, if you get stumped, you have something to refer to.
And then to your point, if you don't have an answer, because the next thing that I had to learn to get, like, how do I come up with answers like on the spot? And I
Yeah,
don't think, because sometimes we feel pressured, I think, to be able to give an answer on the spot. And I think
yeah,
sometimes we have to be okay with it's okay not to know or to
yeah,
want to like diverge and think about it and converge in a reasonable amount of time with some ideas. I think
yeah,
I needed to like accept that that's okay.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you make a fool of yourself when you pretend to know, and you don't.
Yeah.
You run a huge risk, and that affects how you're perceived in the workplace. That people can kind of sense that you're full of it. You know, even though you think you got through it, there's like personal brand is not just like a online social media thing. It's also how people see you in the workplace, and that can make a huge difference in your kind of your career and where you go. So yeah, I totally agree. Like, okay with saying you're not sure, but you're gonna get into it and figure it out, and you'll talk to the users, you'll talk to the data people, and you'll come around with with those answers and actually do it. You got to actually do it.
The
That's
follow
the
through.
yeah.
Yeah. And and it kind of segues really nicely into this like conflict resolution topic that I wanted to ask you about, because like trust in your personal brand, it's such a delicate thing in
Yeah,
organizations. And some organizations have really safe culture. I used to think this
yeah,
idea of safe, like there was like a very small moment where I was like, safe culture, like we're getting a little bit much. And then I really thought about it and I was like, no, 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 no. I get what that means. That's a
yeah,
culture that allows you to be wrong a couple of times and not
yeah,
damn you for it, right? I think to some degree you don't want to be a huge liability over time. But
yeah,
it's like we're not going to be right all the time. We want to
yeah,
strive for that. And so like the trust and working with your PM or your stakeholders, your engineering leads,
yeah,
um, of everyone at differing skill levels, and it's like competing opinions.
yeah,
Uh, how do you if you how do you start to build that trust, and what do you do when it starts to erode, or if there's some
yeah,
relationship starting to erode?
yeah. I think what you're getting to is the idea of psychological safety, and that,
Yeah,
like, as a designer is so important, because that building that into having that as part of your process, where you can have the freedom to iterate and try 5 6 different divergent ideas, and see where you net out. uh, that makes the job a lot more enjoyable, that's for sure. I think a lot of us come into this kind of role because we have the itch to create, we like to build stuff. um, I would say it's not a science, more of an art. People are people. Most people are good people, or they want to be good people. Sometimes there's something else going on in that person's life. Maybe they had a shitty day. Maybe they didn't get the promotion they were looking for, or they're whatever. There's no way to know. I
Right.
try to. Not everyone's comfortable with this. I try to. I think I'm comfortable with vulnerability, like straight away. That's just who I kind of have become, I guess. So I'll try to, when I meet someone new that I know I'm about to work with, I'll try to uh, share some information that humanizes me, and I have a few go-tos because I'm curiously interested. And like, what if I'm meeting you for the first time? Like, where'd you grow up? What school did you go to? Oh, that's cool. Like, what's that town like? What's that like? I just try to keep going. Just try to almost like interview style uh, with somebody new that I'm working with, and then kind of the more we get to know each other, the more this feels like a collaboration and not like an awkward kind of group project. You know?
Yeah, and I think I used to have to remind myself that like everyone in this room wants
Yeah.
this thing to succeed. Like we're on the same team. And at the
Sure.
end of the day, like let's remember that.
Yeah.
And I did used to marginalize some things, which I don't like to do it anymore because I don't think it's fair. But I used to say to myself, like, we're not saving lives.
Yeah.
It's not like life or death if we don't. And that helped me, but I realized I don't think that's a helpful way to compare these scenarios because
Yeah.
these are still tough. Like these are tough situations when you get in a really rough collaboration place with someone that you see and work with every day.
Yeah.
And to your point about empathy, I had a product leader really help me through like a moment that I was having a hard time with. And he told me the story of like the three brick masons. And I've looked this story up and apparently it gets interpreted a lot of different ways. But the message that I took away was, a pedestrian walking down the road passes three brick masons. The first one, is putting bricks on a wall and he says, what are you doing? And he says, oh, I'm building a wall.
Yeah.
Okay, walks past the second brick mason, like, what are you doing? Oh, I'm building a cathedral for community gathering. Okay. And the third one says, I'm honoring the grace of God. And it really was like a story of, output, outcomes, and impact, and kind of the different ways that people speak about and interpret the same action but with like a different objective entirely. And I think with like really understanding like where is the place that stakeholder's coming from, where is the place that peer or that product manager is coming from, like are you speaking in terms of like the tangible, just the wall, like they need more bricks and let's talk on that angle? Are you
Right.
speaking, do they need to hear more about like how is your ask gonna drive bigger impact? And so that story excuse me, really resonated with me to try to get to the bottom of how are they speaking and how
Mhm.
can I relate my ask to what they're focused on.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think it happens a lot, especially with the design and product relationship. I always try to remember though that like we are, if we're working as product designers, we are responsible for product and also design. That's why it's called product design. And I think a huge unlock for designers is to learn the language of business. I think it's a much uh, it's less painful than trying to teach a product person the language of design. So empower yourself to just get into it, and we all strive to I don't like when people talk on social media about how they draw rectangles for a living. I get it, it's funny, but it's like, I don't know, I think it's a lot, it's more, it's a joke, but I get a little annoyed with it because I think it can be meaningful work. And like you said, we're not saving lives. Some people are, some people might.
Yeah.
If you're working in healthcare, there's there's a tragic story of the Robin Hood user who way over
Yeah.
leveraged himself. Like, bad design can have really bad outcomes, uh, even when you were not really not planning for it. So yeah, I think there's some truth in that. And but yeah, I think like you said, we most people have goals, ambitions, and they like to use their work and their projects to kind of guide or support them to get there. So how can you kind of get that out of them, and use design as a tool that's going to help us all get to where we want to go, even if sometimes we disagree on the process or methodology or whatever. Um, Also, sometimes it's just time. Sometimes you got to let your manager know that, hey, like I've been trying to be super resilient about this project, and I think I'm being mature and grown up and not trying to
Hmm.
be like too much of a complainer. But I think once we, hit that next milestone or wrap this up and launch it, I think I'm like ready to move on to another team or try a new challenge. You ask for what you want, you know.
Yeah, self-advocating, I think, is such a big thing that I've really leaned into in the last couple of years, but it
Yeah,
took me a while to get comfortable with that because it can feel kind of gross. It
yeah,
can feel icky to ask for the raise or to
right.
call out the things that you're proud of about your recent work and to try to
Yeah,
match that with this is why I think I'm valuable. I wish more designers wouldn't feel. And I know that's a big thing. Like even in the workshop, that was something I think that it came up in some of our breakout groups. Some designers feeling like they're not very good or don't know how or feel uncomfortable speaking about their work and about themselves fondly. And it's like, oh, get into that habit. It's such a good
yeah,
habit for everyone involved.
yeah. Totally. Yeah, sometimes you gotta give yourself the shout out.
And like the thing about when we say like professional well-being,
Hmm.
I don't think stress just in isolation is bad. Have you heard of have you heard of the what was it called? The Yerkes Dodson law? I think I'm saying that correctly. Have you
No,
heard
I
of
don't
this?
know it. No.
It's two psychologists like in the early 1900s. I think they studied like some dancing mice or something, and they did an
Yeah.
experiment, but essentially concluded that there's optimal levels of stress, and that stress and performance are positively correlated to a point, and then more stress starts to actually decrease performance. And that makes sense to me because I work pretty well
Hmm.
under an optimal amount of stress. I feel like performance is good. I don't love living in that place too long. You hold
Yeah.
a glass of water, it's not heavy, but if you hold that glass of water for 3 months, that's going to start to get heavy.
Yeah.
But that optimal place of stress is good. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on managing stress? Like, how
Yeah.
do you strive to like reduce all signals of stress in the workplace? Like, how do you kind of manage that?
I think it's in the word manage. It's managing stress. It's a part of life. It's built into us evolutionarily. Like it is what kind of gets you up every day to continue to pay your bills, feed your family, raise your kids. As we're getting older, like try to keep your body in shape. These kind of things,
Yeah.
like getting stressed out that things aren't moving like they used to. Like that is a level of stress, and uh, yeah, I think there's healthy stress for sure. It's that kind of like sustained stress that's going to get you in trouble. Uh, but yeah, getting in um, that sweet spot where you're using stress as a way to um, challenge yourself, help you achieve goals, keep you motivated. I think that's okay. Um, but also, like when we talk about a mindfulness practice and about like acknowledging how you feel, acknowledging emotions and things like that, I think it takes some training to get yourself in this place that you can do this properly. But when you start to feel the stress come on, being able to tell yourself like, wait, pause, what am I feeling? I feel blood pressure rising. I'm feeling,
Hmm.
hot, frustrated. I'm snappy. What is this? Why am I feeling this? And just to like, yeah, oh, that's stress. I don't know. Well, many people have different ways of doing this. Some people say, oh, that's stress. Hi, stress. How are you? You can kind
Right.
of personify it if you want, or some people like to think of it as like a balloon or or a feather. Like the feeling is a balloon. I can kind of let go into the wind and kind of release it in that way, and that helps. um, but yeah, putting some space between yourself and the feeling, or yourself and the reaction due to that feeling, harder to do than it sounds. But I think that's a game changer for people. And obviously I'm talking about um, kind of like not long-term sustained periods of stress. Like if you're at a point where you are, um, you can hardly feed yourself. You're like severely in a bad mental place, like that's different than sort of regular day-to-day stress.
Right.
So again, that's the little warning you gave at the start of the show of not mental health advice, just conversation.
Getting some professional help is huge. And to your point, the biggest thing is you can learn the methods. Like box breathing has been huge for
Yeah.
me. Your point about visualizing, naming the emotion, not
Yeah.
like attaching it to your idea, just kind of observing it. And what I was taught was like to think about a running river and the emotion on a raft, and just kind of watch the emotion like
Yeah.
wash down that river. And these kinds of visuals really help me when I'm like overwhelmed. But this is the thing, like you can hear this, you can hear someone like us talk about this, you can have a therapist or a psychologist talk to you about this. But the biggest thing about managing stress is it's not enough to just know what practices are out there. You have to practice. You have
Yeah.
to do the work. It's not easy. It requires ongoing maintenance. It requires that you take a moment out of your day to treat. It's like working out. If you're
Yeah.
not going to put the work in, it's not enough to know that you need to eat healthy and do some other
Yeah.
things. You've actually got to put the work in. And I think that's where apps like Headspace have really become helpful, alongside like is it still the Australian's voice, that like soothing voice that
Yeah.
walks you through this?
Everyone always thinks he's Australian, but he's
Oh,
a
he's
Brit.
not.
Yeah. Yeah. He's British. Yeah.
Okay, I
He's
don't
one
have
of
a
our.
great
He was
reference.
our co-founder. Our co-founder Andy. Yeah.
That voice it's fantastic to listen to. And that's where I think apps like Headspace are incredibly helpful, because they're just like an extra bridge to just putting in the work regularly for like a small period of time a day. And that stuff starts to compound. At least it did for me. It started to compound a lot. And when I find myself, if I've ever found myself getting like overwhelmed by some sort of collaboration, it's like take a second, do some box breathing. Box breathing, by the way, if you've never done it, I love it. It's you close your eyes, and it's just a quick breathing exercise. You can do it in 30 seconds, and you think of a box, right? Four corners, and you just inhale, exhale, in kind of 4 seconds to each side. And you do that a couple of times until like you start to come down from whatever the emotional moment is. And I found that that's really helped me. And I think there's a lot of like physiological things that happen when you give yourself the opportunity to do that when you're really stressed out.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. We do have plenty of box breathing exercises in the app through many different teachers. There's classic meditation, guided, unguided, it's breath work, all types of good stuff like that.
What's been kind of your favorite exercise or practice in recent years on the Headspace app? What kind of works
Um,
for you the best?
I like guided meditation. I'm not sure, for some reason unguided. I don't. I like to have the kind of the little wisdom pieces that that the teacher is kind of giving along the way. Uh, some techniques like noting, I really appreciate. Body scanning. Noting is like that when you're identifying the emotion or the feeling. Body scanning is that kind of like visualizing something from the top of your head, like kind of through your body and through your feet. I use that a lot when I'm trying to fall asleep. It works pretty good. But yeah, just the classic kind of guided, 10-minute, 15-minute meditation. That I'm simple enough.
That's awesome. We're getting to, I'm seeing the comments here, and we've got Alfredo in the back.
Oh, nice.
Do we have some questions coming in, Alfredo? How's it looking with the list of questions? I haven't had a chance to read these.
We've got quite a good amount. I can start reading them out and putting them up on the screen.
Yeah, let's start firing them off. I got dogs back here wrestling, so please ignore
Sounds
that. They're having a great time.
The first one we have is from LinkedIn. It is from Heng. Some of the users, their names won't show up, but that's okay. And he asked, how do you deal with emotional labor and its detrimental effect on mental health that's required for senior/lead designers to improve the design maturity of an org? At what point do you draw the line and quit?
That's a big question, and that might be one of the primary reasons why I've decided to go into an individual contributor path and not a management path. I'm not typically responsible for kind of that side of things, but Tommy, maybe you've got more experience in that world.
It's tough. Listen, I don't want to be the person telling you should you quit a job or not, because it's a very personal decision. And I don't know what part of the world you're located in. I had a story from another product leader who I have an immense amount of respect for. And there was an issue like this coming up. And he kind of broke it down and he said, when I was in university, I had a buddy, and they were over in the UK, and he was like, every day, like, you want to go to the pub? And he's like, why are we going to the pub? And they would go to the pub every day. And he realized, like, pub was kind of like how, at least culturally, they had built community. It was like getting together. In the United States, it's a little different. We have a lot less history here, and work has really become how in the US we've built community, for better or for worse. And it's like, you go to the workplace, you hang out with your coworkers on Zoom, whatever the case is. A lot of people find community in work, and I think there might be some moving away from that. But if you find yourself not getting that community at work, I think that's a pretty good pulse for you to consider, that maybe you want to figure out what that community looks like. And if you're at that place where, like, the lack of community exists, at least for me, that's one way I check in with myself, and say it might be time to start thinking about other options. But in terms of emotional labor work, there are sometimes I have to do tasks that I think aren't the best approach, right? And none of us want to be just order takers all day. But the way I kind of frame it for me is, I have like a bank, right? And I'm putting things into the bank. I'm helping bring someone else's vision to life. And in exchange, I'm building up some of that equity. I'm building up trust equity. I'm building up the ability to, ideally, there's one day where there's a trade-off and I can propose some new ideas. And I've built up enough trust equity that, I can take from that bank and use some of that, for some of the ideas, for some of the work that I'm really passionate about. Now, that's assuming that maybe exists and that's understood on a two-way level, and maybe it's not always. But at least for me, framing it that way, I've had some success with that. And I do, again, going back to what Frank was saying, that people are, I give people the benefit of the doubt. We're all on the same team. And I think if sometimes we have to lead by example and bring someone else's vision to life and do some things that maybe we aren't fully bought in on, but by buying in, I think sometimes that earns our personal brand a little bit of trust from our peers. And in the future, when we have some ideas, we've got a little bit of leverage and more trust to make those things happen.
Yeah. At what point do you draw the line and quit? I think only you will know that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I hope that it doesn't get there for you.
Yeah.
Our next question is from Dylan on YouTube. He asks, for me, the hardest part of effective mindfulness is habit and routine. How do you set yourself up to be consistently implementing mental well-being in your workday?
Yeah, I became a father 2 years ago, and it's been a lot harder for me to take that self-care time since I've got a toddler running around now. So I totally get it. I try to find the kind of small moments in the day, maybe when I'm like filling up a glass of water or making coffee in the morning. I'll try to integrate meditation that's maybe not sitting down with your eyes closed meditation. Things like watching watching the coffee pour into the mug, and like really zoning in on it and trying to be focused on that small thing. Or like things like mindful eating, when I'm taking a bite of some food, trying to zone in on that one sense, that one sense of taste, and focus on the texture. I try to, I know we're talking a lot about food and coffee, but coffee is a big one for me. And just thinking about, how did, as like a little mental kind of exercise of how did the coffee that I'm pouring into this mug get to me today? Thinking about the coffee's journey a little bit. Like before I ground it up, it was on the shelf at a store. There was probably someone at the grocery store who grabbed it out of a box and placed it there. And there's a sense of gratitude there that, something was placed there just for you. And today you get to enjoy it, and kind of backtracking it to, back to somebody farmed it, and it probably has traveled a long way to get to where you are today. Um, sounds corny to some people, but I enjoy that stuff. Uh, if you're commuting, there are ways that you can integrate meditation practice in, sitting on the metro and using visual exercises to focus on something. But yeah, I think mindfulness and meditation can mean a lot of different things to different people. So finding what works for you. For some people, some people uh, get it out of exercise. Jogging, getting into the zone, getting that like perfect playlist on, getting into a flow state. So I just try to kind of do as many of those things as possible, because right now the sitting for 10-15 minutes is hard to find that time, to be honest.
That's great. Great question. Alfredo, I'm reading this too. I can't hear you, Alfredo. I'm not sure if your mic was muted.
Oh, I apologize. Our next question comes from Madi from LinkedIn. I'm in my senior year of software engineering. Things have gotten so bad for me that I feel lost, especially that I don't love software engineering. I don't have a career in something that I don't love. The problem is that I've learned it for the last 6 years, and my parents have invested in a lot of money during those years, and I don't know what to do. I want to learn UX and UI and 3D design, but I know my parents would be very disappointed if I don't have a job lined up this October. I really feel like I need to stop everything I'm doing right now. Otherwise, it feels like it will all come crumbling down. I feel like I'm lacking confidence that I used to have, and I don't know how I ended up losing it. What should I do, and how can I be happy and passionate again?
Yeah, that's tough. Listen, there's at least one thing I want to call out, and this I heard this somewhere in recent years, and it really resonated with me. It was from like an Olympic trainer who kind of tells the students that he trains, which is if you love something that you're doing, there's going to be kind of a rule of thirds, and that's like third of the time you're going to love it, third of the time it's going to be okay, and a third of the time like it's going to suck. And so really the takeaway from that little rule of thirds is that even if you love something, don't set the unfair expectation that everything about that is going to be something that you have to love all the time. I love design. I love product. I don't love it all the time. And so that's at least the first thing that I would say to your question. Get right on the expectation around that. What do you think, Frank?
Yeah, agreed. There's parts of the design process that aren't my favorite. Uh, I would say also important is, um, yeah, in 2 months, the likelihood of yourself learning UX design or 3D design. Not saying it can't happen, but I'm saying that's a very short timeline. I would focus on how you can, like, what the tools you have today to get yourself employed in 2 months and hit the ground running. Like you need to do that like tomorrow, and get the tools in place. What do you need? You need to update your LinkedIn. You need a new updated resume, some kind of portfolio of work. Like get those pieces in place and give yourself what you need to be successful. Spend some time on that, and I'd also recommend. I don't know what the dynamic is like with your parents, but maybe have a conversation with them. Bring this up with them if you feel like that's something they would respond well to. But I do think you're better off to kind of share with them how you're doing in that sense, and that you have a plan over the next 2 months, uh, so that it doesn't come as a surprise later, and hopefully is motivating. But yeah, that's a tough spot to be in. I'm sorry to hear that.
And I would also say, listen, you studying software engineering right now and wanting to get into UI and UX design, that's a great place to be, because guess what? UX and UI designers I've seen come from a number of different walks of lives, and in this position you're in is well suited. It's not a far jump from a software engineer to really getting heavily involved in the UX side of things. It's not at all. You'll be right there on the teams. You'll get a lot of firsthand experience. Take a moment and breathe through this and recognize that big goals don't have to happen overnight, right? You don't have to eat the elephant all in one bite. You can one foot in front of the other, work on some things, learn some skills that will benefit you for the rest of your life, and you can cross that bridge. A lot can happen in 1 year. A lot can happen in 1 year. Don't discount that. And so if you've already got some leverage, some foundation on the software side, lean into that a bit. And then as you get on teams, you're going to find opportunities where they might need someone to work on heavily on the front end side. Raise your hand, advocate for yourself, start working on the front end side of things. You start to become more involved in the decisions related to UI and UX. And that's where you start to build a body of work. Hey, listen, I came from a background of coding as well. And that's how I got into this. And so it's very, I want to say, like, it's not going to be too hard for you to make that jump.
Our next question is from Leonardo, also from LinkedIn. How do you manage your well-being if you're surrounded by ambitious peers? How to deal with it without playing the corporate game, but keeping the sanity level?
That's an awesome question. Yeah. You're with ambitious people. I try to not play the game. I'm on my own path. I'm doing my own thing, and there have been times where I really want that promotion, and I really go for it, and I really put the pieces in place to get to the next level, to get that salary increase, get that title. But then there's other times where I'm I'm happy with doing the job that is expected of me, and I think that's okay. Like, we can't be playing that comparison game with other people all the time. Like, that is, the saying, it's comparison is the thief of joy. If you're going into work every day, or often, and just comparing yourself to other people, yeah, don't do that to yourself. Stop it. It's not healthy. And if you're working in a larger tech company, there's always going to be people who have been in the game longer, who play the politics better, who who are much louder and more ambitious. And yeah, just you're in your own lane, and just stick to it, and you'll get there. And in the grand scheme of things, uh, 1 quarter or 1 year or a couple years in, most of us will probably work somewhere between 30 something years in our lives. What's a quarter? What's a year? It's not that big of a deal.
It's a great perspective. Yeah. And bring people along the ride with you, right? And we all like to focus on our ambitions and our goals. And I noticed that in the line of thinking with gratitude, when I ask other people for their ideas and then celebrate their contribution to whatever it is we're working on publicly, that just has so many great effects for everyone involved. And I just think that's the maybe where to focus. There's a lot of things that we can pay attention to. There's a lot of noise around us. And the only thing we can control, you can't control how ambitious people are around you. You can only control what you can focus on and how you choose to respond to it. And I like to think one of the better ways to do that is by just asking people to contribute and celebrate their contributions along with you.
Our next question is from Chandriana on LinkedIn. How do you manage self-sabotage? What are ways you've effectively challenged this mindset?
That's a big one. Yeah, that's self-sabotage. Yeah, we can easily do this to ourselves. Um, what I try to do is, just one example. I try to not talk poorly about myself. Like, if I'm going into a design critique or something, I don't start with, oh, the work kind of sucks, but whatever, I'll just show it. I'll just talk through it, or, oh, it's not very good yet. Like, I really believe the way you talk about yourself, uh, is it affects the way people perceive you. And so I really try to kind of keep it positive, and just say nothing if I'm going to say something negative or detrimental about myself or the work. Um, it also sets the tone for how people will respond to it. Another way that I've done this is, we're all human. We all go through the highs and lows of work and life. And uh, if I sense that I'm about to write something, like an email or a Slack message, and I can feel my blood boiling a little bit, or I'm feeling judged, or I'm feeling a little heated, I will write it. I'll write it in a draft. I'll write it to Slackbot. I will write it to myself and sit on it for a little bit, a day or two, and or an hour or two, and I'll go and reread it when my head's a little cooler, and I think it makes a big difference, because then you're able to kind of step away from the emotion a little bit and just kind of see it for the, kind of stick to the facts. What about you, Tommy?
Yeah, no, I love that answer. And again, I think it goes back to preparation. I want to be respectful of time, so this will be our last question. But for me, anytime I've self-sabotaged myself, and it's happened a lot, it's been because I was afraid to succeed. I was actually, if I really dug into it, I'm afraid to see what does the other side of that wall look like. I'd rather not. I'm more comfortable in this area that I know than the uncertainty, even if that uncertainty means success. And being better prepared, spending the 30 minutes before a meeting, spending a little bit of planning time the week prior, that allows me to kind of envision and be ready for should whatever it is I'm working on succeed.
Yeah.
So preparation is always such a confidence booster. That's my biggest piece of advice for this. Hey, Frank, I really appreciate your time, man. I love talking with you. And
Yeah,
I think
same.
you've just got so much to add to this space. And yeah, I hope everyone got some great insight from this conversation. I don't imagine this will be the last time we talk publicly, but thank you for being here.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Tommy, and thanks, Alfonso, on the tech. Appreciate you, and thanks to everybody on YouTube and LinkedIn and all that good stuff who tuned in.
You can find Frank on Twitter, Zen Daddy. I love that handle, by the way, Zen Daddy. It's fantastic. He shares great insights, really shows you how he practices mindfulness with his family, and I just love seeing everything you post, man. So we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for being here.
See you, everybody.